And good morning from Philadelphia. Frank here. Another during the week edition of UFO NN Sunday. We've got a special guest with us today, and I will not waste any time. We'll get right down to it. Pass things over to my co-host for today, Chant Hannah. Chant, good morning to you. I'm getting a little confused sometimes about whether we're doing this in the morning or the afternoon, but today it's still morning here in the East anyway. And how are you? And why don't you introduce our special guest for today?
Oh, good morning, Frank. Everything's going really well. Thank you for asking. We have an incredible guest on today. It's Cheryl Costa. She's an upstate New York resident and a New York native who saw her first UFO at age 12. She's a veteran of 2 military services, Air Force and the Navy. She's a retired information security professional from the aerospace industry. Since 2013, Cheryl has written the wildly popular UFO column, New York Skies, for Syracuse New Times. In March 2017, Cheryl and co-author Linda Miller Costa released their UFO statistic book, UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America 2001 through 2015. Their book presents data and analysis trends for 121,000 USA UFO sighting reports between 2001 and 2015. Cheryl was named Researcher of the Year at the 2018 International UFO Congress. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the State University of New York at Empire State College. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hi.
It's so nice to have you with us.
Well, it's a delight to be here.
And congratulations on the Researcher of the Year award, too.
I was just going to congratulate her on that.
That was a surprise, and it was funny because when I saw my picture go up there when they were talking about the announcement, at the big banquet at the IUFO, the International UFO Congress, I about crawled under the table because I would have worn a completely different outfit.
Right? Well, Cheryl, I wanted to ask you something kind of personal, if that's okay. And I would like to cover the topic of your being transgender.
Okay. What would you like to know?
Well, I just wanted to know if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself regarding that subject.
Well, one of the common questions I get, did it hurt? Yes, it hurt. Trust me, it did. and yeah, they gave me a lot of really good medication for that.
Mm-hmm.
From an early age, this is typical of trans persons. From an early age, there's there's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Is how I identified, how I functioned. People in my family treated me. They didn't put me in dresses or anything, but they gave me the kind of what's the term, the leave. They gave me the kind of space they might give one of my cousins. Because they realized that if I went to the movies with the cousins and we were watching Old Yeller or something, I was the one over there with the little girls crying my eyes out,
Mm-hmm.
and they always knew I was a soft touch. And I dealt with that for many years. And then I had to get to the bottom of it. I began reading in the city library when I was in junior high school. And one night, there used to be a television program out of a New York channel called The Merv Griffin Show. And one night he had Christine Jorgensen, who was like one of the first, she was one of the early trans people back in the 30s, 40s time frame. And she used the big 25-cent word, transsexual.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And with that word, I went and started doing research and look up at the library. I was kind of a scientifically oriented kid. And I started researching this, and I got books through interlibrary loan. I mean, I knew even at 8th and 9th grade, I knew how to exercise the library system. And I got a ton of books. And probably by the time I got out of high school, I was better read than most doctors on the topic matter. And this wasn't a case of self-diagnosis. It was just an understanding that I wasn't one alone. Two, I think this might be the situation with me. And then many years later, probably about another 10 years later, I had already served in Vietnam. I was in the Navy. and it was really becoming an issue for me at an emotional level. And I drove 50, 60 miles out of town under an assumed name, and I went to a clinic and I got screened. And the diagnosis came back. I didn't tell them what I thought I was. The diagnosis came back that I was a trans person. And then I was saddled with that knowledge and that monkey there for a number of years. And then much later, in the 80s, I just I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I had to do something. So I got myself into therapy. This is about 86 time frame. And with a therapist who was well versed in the topic matter. He was a sexologist, and he was connected with Hopkins, Johns Hopkins University. And, we took it a step at a time. And the pushback I had from family and friends amounted to, she's confused. She doesn't know what she wants. Okay. Okay, fine, great. But the bottom line on this whole thing at that point was, they kept saying, well, if you do surgery on her, she'll think it's the wrong thing. So one of the things we looked at was, my therapist and I talked about this idea of taking Depo-Provera, which is the medication they give the sex offenders so they're not functional. Mm-hmm. And the psychoendocrinology department up at Hopkins thought it was a cool idea to try. And of course, I had to sign all kinds of releases, and maybe you'll grow pine trees out of your toenails in 20 years. We don't know, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we did it, and I quieted down to a dull roar. Mm-hmm. And it was weird. It was really weird. And one of the other things that happened was suddenly I found I had this deep spiritual connection to the divine, and my therapist gave me free sessions. He was talking to me 3 times a week, and I was only paying for one, Oh, wow. Because I was an experiment. And then a few other people signed on for the experiment, and there was about 10 of us who were the original trial with that. It's a standard process now. Okay. Mm-hmm. But it's based on something me and another friend of mine did when we gone to our therapist. The bottom line, Hopkins figured out that I was neurochemically allergic to testosterone. Mm-hmm. And so, again, after going through most people do the minimum. It's like a year's worth of therapy. They do the absolute minimum. Yes. And I did 5 years because everybody kept telling me I was going to flush my life down the toilet and I was going to be dead in the gutter in a couple of years and all this stuff. And I figured, well, if I'm going to wreck my life like they say I'm going to, I'm going to make sure I get to the bottom of it. I had good insurance. So I just said, let me do as much therapy as possible and get to the bottom of it all. Okay. Not just the gender stuff, but other issues that were going on in my life ended up making some of this a bigger monkey than it was.
And what were you doing career-wise during these years?
Okay, I did serve in the Air Force for 2 years, 12 days. I did serve in Vietnam. And then I had a brief assignment out of Japan into Korea. And then my hometown got wiped out in a flood in 1972. So I got out on a hardship discharge to help my family rebuild. A couple of years later, I went into the Navy and went into a high-tech electronics program. I guess my technical designation, if you were to read my DD 214, which is your discharge papers, I was a senior electronic warfare specialist. Okay, and so that's it. And I was a qualified periscope photographer, all that kind of stuff. Because I was in nuclear submarines. That was it. Now, and I went to work for Lockheed. The early version of the company I went to work for was IBM Federal Systems, or military products branch of IBM. They eventually, about 14 years later, got bought by L'Oreal, a defense contractor. This is at the end of the Cold War. All the defense contractors started consolidating. They had us for about 2 years, and then Lockheed Martin bought us. And so I'm legacy IBM Federal Systems, but I was a Lockheed employee technically, and they considered my whole career, 32 years with them, as a Lockheed career.
Okay. And that accounted for the good insurance as well then?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And
good.
I was in IBM Federal Systems when I went through when I went through the change, and it was probably the most miserable 3-year train wreck of my life.
I see.
So that was one question I was going to ask you. Did this hurt your wallet? But okay, that explains a lot of that.
Well, it did hurt
Yeah.
my wallet at that level. My divorce with my spouse, we were in Virginia when we got divorced, no children, but when we got divorced, and I kind of got hoodwinked into, I was very heavy into transgender community leadership, that type of thing. I was the program director for the first International Foundation for Gender Education Convention. Okay. It gives you an idea of the kind of stuff I'm about. In fact, a couple of universities, I had 2 different universities ask for my papers because I was one of these early activists. We're talking, this is the Susan B. Anthony level of activists that there was about a dozen of us, and I'm probably one of three of a dozen are still alive. And so that's kind of what I did. And like I said, IBM Federal Systems made my life absolutely miserable during the change. But you got to understand this change is happening in the 1980 late 1980 time frame, and it wasn't just like all of a sudden go out and have an operation. It was like a couple of years where I'm on hormones, my facial features are changing, I'm getting softer. I had a perm, but I wasn't allowed to wear a dress to work or anything. In fact, at one point, it affected my security clearance. Okay, and they were about ready to, not IBM Federal Systems, the government was about ready to take my security clearance away because I was pretty much what's his name during the daytime at my day job, and I was pretty much Cheryl after work during this transition phase. And they said, well, we think you can be blackmailed because not everybody here knows about it. And, I said, well, it's discretion. They said, no, but we think you can be blackmailed. So I looked at the investigator and this government investigator and big old guy. And I said, tell you what, I think I can fix that. Yeah, I don't think so, but come back. I'm coming back in 3 weeks. We'll turn your clearance off then. I said, fine. So 3 weeks later, I came back and I tossed the VHS tape on his desk. And he says, what's that? I said, the blonde on Phil Donahue. I'm the redhead on Gary Collins' Hour magazine. And he said, what? I said, I came out on national television. I cannot be blackmailed. And oh, by the way, I ran dubs of this VHS tape and I gave it to all the guys in my department and project to take home and watch with their wives.
That's fantastic.
Well, the hook on that was they came back and they said, well, that was poor judgment. So they sent me to see a Department of Defense certified shrink. Because they thought this was poor judgment. You came out on national television. That wasn't very discreet, but they were beating me up for being discreet, So I went and talked to this guy, and he talked to me for 10 minutes, and he said, Cheryl, you're saner than the people who sent you here. So they ran me through a full set of psychologicals, and they got all done. They had subject X on this full set of psychologicals, and the psychologist who was doing the test took it all down to hall to his peers and said, "Tell me what you think." And they said, "Very high educated, highly intelligent person took this test. Very visually oriented, a little on the historical side. This woman's a little hysterical, but she should be in Mensa." He said, would you like to meet him?
Wow.
So that's kind of where it went. So.
Well, Cheryl, you wear the top coat and cane and do the talk shows and the number crunching. You have a bachelor's in art and degree in entertainment writing and production. And your wife, Linda, is the scientific brains behind the statistics project that you all have going, which we will go ahead and reterm later if we need to use different terminology for that. But she set the tone for the book that you all wrote. She's a research librarian and more. She's the guiding hand of the projects that you do. Why do you and your wife have such passion for statistical data?
Okay, here's where it came from. I had been, in 2013, I started writing a column for the Syracuse New Times, weekly column on the blog. Okay. They told me they were going to try me out. 13 other editors had thrown me out of their office. Okay. Other places. And New Times said they'd take a chance on it. And they said,
Cheryl, just to jump in really quick,
go ahead.
Did you pitch them on a UFO related blog, or is this
No, this was
transgender?
I pitched everybody a UFO related blog.
Okay.
Okay. And it was about strictly at the time, it was going to be about New York State sightings in the past because nobody ever reported them. So what the heck, lots of material out there to talk about. And so went to Syracuse New Times, which was a weekly. And he said, okay, the editor sat down, the editor of that time sat down with me, and he was as well read as I was, as it turned out. He said, I'm sympathetic. He says, go ahead, give me 4 or 5 year articles. We'll try you out for a month, maybe 6 weeks. And if we don't like it, we'll take you out. And I said, that's fair. That's fair. That's fine. About a month later, calls me up on the phone. Cheryl, we want to talk to you. Come on over and see us. I'm going, oh, that's it. It's over with. It's like that line from The Princess Bride from the dread pirate Roberts. I'll most likely kill you in the morning kind of thing. And so I go over to see him. I had a tough time finding parking lot space. And I get up there. I'm about 5 minutes late for the meeting, 5-10 minutes late. And I walk into the meeting and he's standing up talking to this boardroom table of people, and he stops, he looks over at me and points at me and says, there's our rock star. And I look over and says, what are you talking about? He says, Cheryl, you've got more page views in the past month than all of our columnists combined. So needless to say, we've been doing it now a little over 5.5 years. Now, how did we get to the book?
Yes, that was my next question.
Well, yeah, if you could backtrack a little further, how did you get to the UFOs seriously enough to want to write about it for the Times in the first place?
Well, I was well read on the topic since the 60s. Okay. When I was in high school, when I saw my first UFO with my mom and dad. Okay. And it was explained to me. And then my mother and I, when I was in high school, mom, back in those days, most people think their mom and dad are stupid. Mom and I got kind of developed a little bit of a bond, and I started getting books at the library. She got books at the library. We sat there and we read them, kind of gave each other little book reports about what we read. When Von Daniken's book came out,
yes,
she dog-eared on the top pages. I dog-eared on the bottom pages. It was nuts. But then I graduated from high school. I joined the Air Force and got as far away from my hometown as I could. Okay. And because in the back of my mind, I knew that I was a trans person and I didn't want to be hanging around that conservative little Republican town anymore. So I took off to go see the world. And so the bottom line with the whole thing was I was very well read. Over the years, I read about anything I saw come up, a newspaper article, a new book, something like that. If I didn't buy it, I went over to the library and, oh, yeah, Stanton Friedman's got a new book. And I'd read the book, So I was always kind of a UFO bystander. Plus, I had a security clearance for 30 years. I had a security clearance. Actually, over 30 years, I had a security clearance. Being a member of something like MUFON would nix your security clearance. Okay. So I had enough problems being, getting ready to be a trans person. I just didn't want to do that. And then I was retired from Lockheed, and I was working for a newspaper in their technical department while I was finishing my degree. And I had this situation where I was doing we had just got the presses rolling that night, and we were just doing the press. And I read this article. It was November 5th, 2012. And the article said, UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend. And this was on CNN.com at that time. And I sat there and looked at it and I said, that feels like misinformation. That doesn't feel right. So for the first time in my life, I went out to the National UFO Reporting Center's webpage, and further back in one of their pages there, I was able to get some year-end totals. And I put them in a little spreadsheet, and I put the graph, and the thing went up like a rocket to the right, And my first thought was when I looked at this graph bar chart going up like a rocket, I said, well, what memo didn't the UFOs get? At that point, I started reading some of these reports that were in their database over the next few nights. And then at that point, I started writing up some articles, and that's when I went out and started peddling it about a month later. Took about 6 months to sell the show, to sell the idea of the column.
Well, Cheryl, I wanted to talk about your beautiful wife, Linda Miller Costa, And
it's actually Costa.
is it Costa? Okay.
Yeah, it's Costa, like
Yeah.
Costa Rica.
Yeah, thank you very much for correcting me on that. I wanted to just talk about her background a little bit. It says that here, what does the MLS stand for, by the way? Masters in
Library Science.
Got it. Yes. And she has a BA in psychology from Case Western Reserve University and a library science master's from the University of Maryland. After a career in scientific research and publishing in Washington, D.C., she is currently at Lemoyne College Library in Syracuse, New York. She's a co-author of the book that you both wrote, UFO Sightings Desk Reference. And Linda defined the parameters of the UFO Sighting Desk Reference, designing it to be not just another UFO book. She wanted it to be a scientific reference book and, in essence, a 21st century UFO sightings census. You know, I just wanted to mention something to you, Cheryl. I told quite a few people I would be interviewing you today, and every single person has your book. It is an often used reference, and it's dog-eared. People highlight it. It's worn out. Some people say they need to buy a new copy. Obviously, it's a go-to reference guide for over a lot of endeavors that people have, a lot of research that they use it for. Thank you for having written this book with your wife.
Let me explain how that came to be. I was starting to show some charts with early statistics, just adding up the counties in New York State, you know, that type of thing. Back in 2015 at the International UFO Congress. And a professor from Sonoma University asked me if I could get him some very specific county information for the southern part of the Hudson Valley area, just north of New York City. And I said, wow, that's a tall order, because MUFON collected county data, but it wasn't accurate, and National UFO Reporting Center didn't collect it at all. And so Linda and I sat down and we came up with a way of putting the data in there. It was very primitive at the time. I sat there on Google and looked it up for 4,200 records. But when we started plotting it out after we looked up the counties, suddenly we were seeing patterns in New York State. I showed it to the other New York State UFO researchers and saying, we didn't know there was a cluster in that area. We didn't know there was a cluster over there either, you know. I'll give you an example. Everybody knew the Lake Ontario, the Lake Erie area out towards Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and like that. That was called the Lake Erie effect. Oh, there's tons of UFO sightings out there. No one knew that the Monroe County, which is the Rochester, New York area on Lake Ontario, has almost as many sightings. And the question they all said to me online one night on Skype is, maybe we got a Lake Ontario effect. Maybe there's a base under Lake Ontario. We don't know. And there's folktale to support that. Since the 19th century, there's been rumors from both sides of the lake, Canadian and the American side, that there was a lost civilization underneath the lake. So who knows?
Yeah.
The bottom line, though, let me explain the bottom line.
Yes.
One night, this was October of 2015. The two of us were sitting in our local pub, looking at each other over a pint. And we said, look at all the wonderful stuff we've identified here. This is cool stuff. All the other New York State researchers are going gaga over this information because they didn't know any of this stuff just by adding county data. Okay. What if we did it for the whole country? And we stared at each other for about 15 minutes across those beers, you know, going, oh my God, this is going to be a project. And it turned out, we thought maybe it'd take us a year. It took us 16, 18 months to do it. Okay. That's when Linda got involved, and she says, okay, this thing is going to be a statistics book, kind of like the census. We're going to do like a UFO census. It's not going to have any cute little aliens on the cover. It's not going to have any sighting case studies. It's going to be numbers, charts, graphs, numbers, statistics, data. We want this thing to be at home in the reference section of any library. Okay. And then we said, okay, we'll download the data starting on morning of January 1st, 2016. You wouldn't believe the amount of bandwidth that's available on January 1st in the morning. I had all of National UFO Reporting Center downloaded in about 2 hours. It was really, really amazing.
I did have a question about Lake Ontario. Are there any current upticks in sightings or contacts in that area?
No, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't
Okay.
tell you. See,
All right.
because we're statisticians, we're always working
Right.
fast. But if you want an uptick, okay, there is an uptick in the Hudson Valley region, Orange County, the counties down there associated with Pine Bush, you know, and the people that are talking to me about this are other researchers, and they're saying suddenly they're getting dozens of phone calls, kind of on the scale of what they got back in the 80s when that was a really hot tomato of a place to have sightings. So something is going on again there. We're looking into it. But again, I have to kind of work with data this older. I don't work with current what's happening right now. People ask me that all the time. I say, I haven't a clue. I don't study that stuff. I just study the old stuff.
Mm-hmm. Are there any pitfalls in being a statistician? Do you ever have any findings that seem ambiguous to you that you can't categorize, or anything that is there anything about the methodology of what you do that that you have issues with? Anything at all, that there's challenges regarding being a statistician?
Well, that wasn't my forte in high school. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
there's as one of my dear old friends from high school put it when he saw the copy of the book. We've been friends since the 8th grade. He said, Cheryl, you know what this book means, don't you? And I says, what? He says, you wrote a book of statistics. There's 5 dead math teachers rolling over in their grave like a rotisserie. You know, yeah. Math didn't gel for me until I was about 28. It was a maturation thing.
Mm-hmm.
I barely passed math. In fact, I flunked geometry in high school. I was terrible at it. And then something about 25 to 28 years old, something clicked one day. And it was like somebody threw a switch on. Suddenly, I'm sitting there with a scientific calculator running patterns and numbers. And oh, my God, numbers were from God, you know. It was weird. But, I mean, if you'd asked me that when I was 22 years old and going, oh, my God, people are telling me I should glue one of these 4-banger calculators to my hand because I'm stupid in math, you know.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people, they hear statistics being spouted off by people on the radio, on the news, the average Joe who just wants to have a discussion about a certain topic. And yes, people do forget that it is actually a branch of mathematics that deals with collection, organization, analysis, and interpretation of numerical data.
Yep.
Do you ever find yourself falling asleep while you're collecting this data? Because it is, after all, dry data. And now, there is something extremely exciting about it, but does it ever get sort of humdrum for you at times?
The actual gathering the data is easy. I download from 2 national databases. I'll download National UFO. I just about a month ago, downloaded National UFO Reporting Center data for 2018. Okay.
Yes.
It requires a degree of cleanup. Okay. We've actually, back when we did that thing back in 2015 when I did New York State and we didn't know what we were doing. Well, Linda and I are former government contractors, so we actually wrote process procedures. This is how you clean it up. Do this step first, do this step second, do this step third, and we actually have a process procedure. Things that took us 6 months to do then, I can do in 3 or 4 days now. Okay?
I see.
Because we know what we're doing. Okay? The problem we've run up against, where, as you said, there's some point where I get bored. Yeah, I had to add latitude information to over 1,000 records a couple of days ago. Both my wrists are sore from working the keyboard and the mouse, because I had to manually look this stuff up. I had 2 screens going. I had the spreadsheet screen, and I had Google, and I was looking up these individual towns, cut and paste the name of the town in next to the city. Bang. Oh, here's the latitude. Bam. Drop that in. So it was 3 days of cut and pasting and lookup. My wrists are still aching from the effort, and I was bored out of my mind. I thank goodness I have XM radio here. I would just put some relaxing spa new age music on and just sat here and cranked at it. The actual crunching the data after I've got it all cleaned up and got what I want inserted into it and start looking at patterns and things, that I find fascinating. And I always try to do it on a fresh in the morning after I've had 2 cups of coffee and say, okay, what can we find today? And we found some, a lot of people say, well, you just added up the numbers. No. When we did the book, we were just adding up numbers. Now what we're doing, and we got the data in the main database out from 2001 to 2017, and I've got this 2018 separate. We haven't merged it yet. It's still got a couple of issues I got to fix. But the bottom line is we have 140,850 sightings in our database. Now, people call me all the time. And this is one of the frustrating things from people in the UFO community. Well, what's your top 25 cases? I don't have cases.
Right.
I strip off all that information. All I've got is what, when, and where. Okay. And I keep trying to explain to people, I don't study the cases. I don't vet every single one of these things down to the nut and bolt.
Right.
I look at the anthill, not the individual ant.
Yeah, just to jump in, you had mentioned the different latitudes for sightings, and was there a specific reason why you decided to go ahead and look at that particular segment of information?
Up until now, no. But I've been getting, in 2016, a book came out called, oh, darn it.
37th Parallel? The Mesrick
37th
book?
Parallel, the UFO Superhighway. Yes. And I've had questions keep coming up, and every time I was presenting someplace at a state conference or one of the bigger conferences, oh, what do you think of that? Does that hold water? I didn't know, but in a couple of the places I said, look.
If I could jump in here real quick,
ahead.
Mesrick is a pretty interesting guy. I don't know why he chose the UFO that particular aspect of the UFO subject to write about, but he's written a couple of books that were turned into movies that folks might recognize. He wrote the book that the movie The Social Network was based on. He also wrote a film, it escapes me the title, but it was basically about a bunch of MIT students and their professors who went out to Vegas and card counted. And that was turned into a movie starring Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, and they're trying to turn this one into a movie too.
Okay.
Here's the deal. It's bogus.
Okay. Well, tell us why.
Okay, there are 10. And I only crunched this data in the last 72 hours. Okay, and we used only 2018 data to do it. So we're talking a total of about 6,645 records to do it with. Okay. The total number of sightings reports that we were dealing with was 6,929, but there were 284 records that did not have a city location on it. So I had to mute them out during I was generating the report. Okay. I added latitude information on the gross level, at 40, 50, 30, whatever. I didn't go down into the
you didn't go down to the second and all that.
Okay. But basically, there are 10 other latitudes that have far more sightings than the 37th. Okay, point one. The other thing is when people were asking me about it over the last 2 years, I'd have to shrug my shoulders and give them a gut instinct and say, look, my familiarity with the states and the counties and those general regions, latitudes and like that, my gut instinct is no, those are pretty lackluster states for sightings for the most part. Okay. And we proved it. For 2018, there was only about 200 and give me 20 seconds here. I got the chart right here in front of me. I'm going to flip down to the page. This is hot off the spreadsheet. Okay. The 37th parallel in 2018 had 257 sightings in it. Okay. Well, the 34th parallel had 614. The 44th down to the 40th averaged between 355 and almost 600. Okay, so the rest of the article I read, like in New USA Today, said, well, they had paranormal things there and they had cattle mutilations there. Come on, they're cherry picking. I sat here yesterday afternoon and I Googled cattle mutilations, and all I did was drop in a different state. I had a list here. I just cut and pasted 50 states. Every single state has some degree of livestock mutilations. Every single state. People always think it's always Colorado or someplace. Okay. Every single state has some degree of it. Okay. Sheep or cattle. Okay. And in some cases, some other animals. The other thing was, oh, yeah, and there's all this paranormal stuff that's going on. Google any one of those states for paranormal, and you'll find half a dozen to a dozen paranormal societies and a list of all the scariest places and scariest trails in the state.
Sure.
Every place has got paranormal. So I feel that he cherry picked. And the fact that they're making a movie about this thing without checking, really presenting some real numbers really irritates the hell out of me. And I wrote USA Today about it.
Okay. Now, one article, let me, we're kind of on the different patterns that are showing up. And I've always been interested in the per capita numbers. And there's what's that? No? Well, I don't know. I find this pretty interesting now, Cheryl.
Every conference, I don't care.
The state with the most UFO sightings, why they have so many, and I get these are your numbers you're quoting here. I'm assuming these are your numbers. That it's very interesting. The top 10 states converged around certain areas in the country, certain regions in the country, and regions that I wouldn't have expected when I first saw this. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, all top 10 per capita sighting states. Oregon, Washington, Montana, Idaho, again, up in the far northwest, again, not necessarily an area you'd immediately think of having a...
But let me stop you right there.
Okay.
Those states have smaller populations.
They do.
And the ratio of sightings spikes that number. Okay? Now...
right, but by the same...
That's why I don't like that sample, because it's I think it's bogus to use the per capita in the context of this.
Really? Okay, because the raw numbers are obviously going to be higher in states with big populations like California, Texas, New York.
Yeah, but no, it's not always driven by population. Again, I got beat up on that about a year ago. Someone said, "Well, California, it's got the big 40 million population." So I took and built a pseudo California on the East Coast. Similar landmass area, same latitudes, actually more of a population. All the states I use, I had 52 million people in this pseudo California on the East Coast. Okay. And it didn't have the same number of sightings. There's something else going on in California. Now, let's take one more spin on this. I was sitting on a radio show one night, and I had my book laying in my lap, and we were in a commercial break. And something I hadn't noticed, in our book, we have the only maps we used census region maps, okay? And I was sitting there, and I glanced in the Midwest. The water's the big thing. I don't care about the per capita. Water's the big thing. You look around the Great Lakes, and all the states that are touching the Great Lakes have numbers in the many thousands, 2,000 to 5,000, okay? For that sample year of 2015, 2001 to 2015, okay? Move 2 states away, and the numbers fall into the low hundreds. Here in New York State, 52% of the sightings in New York State are along either the St. Lawrence Seaway or down the Hudson.
Okay, and so has your research revealed that increased sightings in any given area, say the Hudson Valley, are attributed to notable environmental or technological or political changes, or do you believe they're random?
In the Hudson, I can't tell you, because the Hudson is a strange animal. Orange County has an unusual amount of, at least it's being tracked. This is what makes it an unusual amount. Somebody's been studying it. They have a rather large amount of reported abductions. Okay. Well, Orange County happened to be the same place where Whitley Strieber lived, or at least his cabin was. Okay.
Yes, that's intriguing.
It's been a hotbed down there for years. So there's a couple of us that have tracked this stuff down as far as that. The expert, the person, if you want to track it by environment, in fact, my editor asked me to do it at one point. Okay, for New York State. And the only thing we went after 15 different things. We went after pollution, we went after natural resources, we went after population, we went after ley lines, for goodness sakes. We went after everything, and nothing worked. Then one day I'm talking to Ben Moss. He's the former state director for MUFON in Virginia. And he says to me, he says, can you get an ancient map of Indian territories? I said, yeah, I can probably get something like that. He says, overlay it over your numbers, which I did. And it matched up with Native American territories like you wouldn't believe. Now, we have a little poster on the wall here that says correlation does not necessarily equal causality, but it's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that works in a number of different states, like out west. Have you been able to do the same kind of thing out there? Where,
theoretically, yeah. Now, the guy you really want to have on as a guest is Thomas Conwell.
I know Tom.
Okay. Tom is from Troy, New York, right? Is this the guy you're talking about, Frank?
I don't know exactly where he's from, but
he's Troy, New York. He has done him and I were doing our research about the same time, so we've traded a lot of notes back and forth. And of course, he uses my book a great deal. He's gone and mapped the entire United States for this kind of stuff of where really are they and what are they hanging around. They hang around our brownfields. They hang around our pollution sites. They're very interested in that kind of stuff. There's certain polluted rivers they seem to hang around tremendously. Tom's the guy to talk about that. I defer to Tom on all of that stuff.
Are you talking about Tom Conwell, who is he actually calls himself a ufologist, to my knowledge, but he is part of the Extreme Paranormal Counter Response Team for MUFON?
Yeah, he wrote the book They Are Here. That's him.
Yeah, he wrote the whole series of books They Are Here. He's done it for every major region of the country. He's only 2 hours up the road from me. Him and I sat down and talked about this a number of times. He's really sharp. He focused on that. I just worried about statistics.
Okay. Frank, do you have any questions?
Well, yeah. You had mentioned before, we had talked about how stats from your book have ended up probably more different stories from different media organizations around the country will take stats from your book, and they'll write, if they're located in, let's say, Arizona, they'll write up a little story about, we had X number of sightings in Arizona, we had X number of sightings in Connecticut. Your book has probably been cited in more different articles about UFOs around the country over the last few years than any other, and it's probably not even close. You told me before we started here that you had an interesting story about how all that's come about, so why don't you tell us all about that now? Okay,
but just before the book was getting ready to come out, I reached out to, and again, remember, I'm a media person, so I looked at the 10 major states carry 52% of the sightings in the United States. Okay. So I reached out to the major markets. I reached out to at least 2 to 3 outlets in every major market in that state, especially if they had huge amounts of sightings. And I had this general letter. I would give them some basic stats about their area and told them I can tell them more. And I reached out to all these newspapers, TV stations, and such. Okay. It was crickets. I got silence. The only newspaper, in fact, this is cute. The only newspaper that took me up on it was the Seattle Intelligencer. Okay, and they had one of their freelance reporters work with me. Now he got enough information from me. I talked about California. What's interesting is the science editor for the San Francisco Chronicle turned me down cold. In fact, he did answer me. He said, I said, can you tell me why you're not interested? Oh, quote, the issue of UFOs was settled long ago. And he was talking about Condon, 1968.
Oh, the Condon report. Oh, my gosh.
These aren't the droids you want, right? All right. So when the guy released the article up in with the intelligencer, he had also, because of the nature of the interview, he had all the data and information for California. So he wrote up a variant of the same article, and it was published in SF Gate, which is the San Francisco Chronicle's online edition. Well, I noticed it that morning. He told me it had been released, and I noticed it was 2 different places. I said, "Well, okay, that's good." And of course, they were yelling, "California's #1." You know how the United States is. Everything's got to be mega and #1. So it was like,
Right.
California's #1, rah rah rah. And later that day, I get this phone call from KBC Talk Radio in L.A., and they said, "Cheryl, your book and your data set the West Coast social media on fire. Can we talk to you on drive time?" I said, "Sure." And what it amounted to was everybody, again, California's #1. This guy gets on just before he puts me on the air. He goes to do the introduction, and he tells everybody there's nothing to this stuff, but we'll have her on anyway. Okay. But so I'll never do that station again. But the bottom line was, that's how it initially started. And then it fell off. It fell out of the news cycle in 3 days. Okay. Let me make sure you understand the scope here. When we put that book together, Linda and I both agreed that most of the books that have been out there in UFOlogy was predominantly about, it was like an FM radio oldies FM radio station, the best UFO crashes from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that's what it was like. So that's why she said, we're going to do a scientific book. So we are the seminal book on UFO statistics. That's why everybody's quoting it. Now, the one thing you got to look at, if I'm being cited, Frank, are they citing the National UFO Reporting Center, or are they citing my book? There's 2 different sets of numbers out there. And I've had some of these little video services that make the little video memes type of thing at that time. They were using my numbers, but they weren't crediting us. And I went crazy. I did a neutron dance on the editors who ran those things.
Good. You should do that. Absolutely.
Well, it's called plagiarism. It's called plagiarism.
Yes. I did have a question for you about MUFON and NUFORS. When I looked up MUFON statistics and was in search of something very specific, like the latest MUFON statistics for anything, the most recent statistics they have are for December 2018. How do we find anything, more recent than that? Or is that the latest stats?
Are you a member?
No. And that was my next question. Do you need to be a member in order to have access to that?
Yeah. If you are a member and you get their kind of like their online mailings, I get a monthly mailing that's got the monthly stats for that.
But how up to date are they? So let's just say, for example, you jump into the MUFON database and look for the data sets or for whatever you feel is relevant for your subject.
No, I don't.
You don't. Okay.
No, at the end of 2018, right? It was about a month ago. I waited till I let things settle a little bit. In the late part of January, I reached out to the director at MUFON, and I said, I need a data dump. Now, when I did this, when we were doing the original book, I had to go through 9 hoops and 50 questions, and it was ridiculous. They were treating me like I was some kind of idiot. And finally, Linda got on the phone, and she's Miss Executive, and she got on there, and 20 minutes later, I had a database sent to me. Okay.
Understood. Okay. So
since the book came out, Jan Harson has a copy of it on his desk all the time. Okay. He since that time, I just simply call him up and say, "Can I have the 2018 data? What, when, and where? And can I have it in a spreadsheet in CSV format?" And she said, "Okay, I'll have it for you in a couple of days." And next thing you know, about 3 days later, I get an email from him. So it's a much easier process from me. But
that's good. Yeah.
That's how I do it. I don't go into CMS or anything like that. I'm not even a member of MUFON. I'm given a great deal of privilege with them because why am I not a member? I'm a journalist, and our attorney wants us to respect the idea of conflict of interest. Right. So I have the flexibility, even though they've been very kind to me, I have the flexibility to trash them if I have a good reason to.
Well, I've interviewed Jan myself and also Frank and I together. So we've interviewed him multiple times. He's a wonderful person, has been very giving towards us. Any kind of question we have to pose to him, he's been very gracious in answering everything. And we look forward to interviewing him again soon this year.
He's a very polite gentleman. He also comes from the same heritage I did. We were both ex-IBMers.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, I was talking to him yesterday for about an hour or so.
Yeah, I was talking to him today also. The National UFO Reporting Center, I had the same question for you that I just posed to you about MUFON. How do you go about getting the latest data from them?
Well, okay, again, is it the latest data? I just go out there to their website and look at the stuff that might have happened. They're running 2 weeks behind. They only refresh the online database on the website about every 2 weeks.
And see, these are the things the public wants to know about, the fact that there might be a latency of 2 weeks or so.
There, with New Fork, there certainly is, okay? You have to kind of watch his front page on the main page of the thing.
That's Peter Davenport.
Yeah,
we ought to give him a plug.
Peter Davenport will make that indication that the database has been updated to cover a certain window. Usually it's like the first, about the 25th, 26th, something like that, and then again at the end of the month. So that's how you catch the stuff that's just happening any moment. Now, if there's something really cool going on a weekly basis, you'll see him post on that front page a couple of really notable sightings, and usually he'll talk about it on he's a regular call-in guest with George Norrie on Coast to Coast.
Yes, yeah. Peter Davenport has been the director of NUFORS, as you know, since '94, and he's worked as a college instructor, a commercial fisherman, a Russian translator in the Soviet Union. He actually has quite a long resume, and he also he was the founding president of the Seattle-based biotech company, which currently employs over 300 scientists and technicians. Anyway, what I was going to ask you about Peter Davenport is, do you ever have communication with him directly?
No. Okay. When we were doing the original book, Linda had a little bit of correspondence with him about what we were doing. And that was it. We sent him 2 copies. We sent Jan 2 copies. But he's never actually reached out to us.
Okay.
You know who has never had me on their radio show?
Who?
George Norrie.
I wonder why that is.
I've been on Coast to Coast, but I did it on the weekend with George Knapp, but twice. But the producer and George doesn't want to talk to me for some reason. And which is weird, because considering I've got Linda and I've got the only book of statistics out there,
Right. Yes, that's true. So you've reached out to George Norrie, is that correct?
We did back when the book was first out, and then about a year later I reached out to them again, and again, crickets. I get that an awful lot. In fact, past year or so, I reached out to New York State media outlets in the major cities here in New York State, and I said, look, I got the latest data. I had the 16, 17 data, okay? And I had some really cool stuff to say, and every one of them either didn't answer me, or if they did, they got me on a conference call and basically laughed at me. And it's a darn shame. It really is. I would have thought after December 16th, when we had the Pentagon stuff coming out with the New York Times and everything, there's a little story about that too. Let's look at that. 2016, okay? January of 2016, the CIA, who had always said for years, we don't know nothing about no UFOs, okay, releases through the National Archives a rather significant amount of UFO material. That was the closest first kind of like a little sip from the Dixie cup glass worth of disclosure. Okay, last thing that Obama's people did. And I had a lot of those PDFs downloaded, and apparently the folks at the New York Times looked at it and said, "Oh, there is something to this." Okay, so somebody had me in a conversation with Ralph Blumenthal. He was one of the writers on the Pentagon thing a year later. Okay. later in the year. He approached me. We talked. I shared some stuff. I got him a copy of the book, and he went into his editors essentially, and he says. Some old ladies in Syracuse did the science, and he throws a 2.5-pound, 374-page book on their desk. There was no refuting it. There's the numbers. Okay, it wasn't just a lot of little stories from people. And so they decided to interview Linda and I. He came up on the train, spent the day with us. We sat in the old house. We had a library in the front, sat there in front of the fireplace with tea and scones and talked the afternoon away. And Linda came home from work. We talked a couple more hours away. And then we went down to the Irish pub and talked the evening away. He wanted to make sure we weren't living in my mother's cellar. And he wanted to get to the bottom of it. And we talked in depth about this. Okay. Now that was in April 24th. That article broke on the internet. On the 25th, it came out in print. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What happens 7 months later? December 16th, Leslie Kean, a couple of other people from Political released the story about the Pentagon. A lot went on in 2017, and that was kind of the buildup to it.
Yeah, Helen Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean. As you said, December 16, 2017, in the Washington Post, they came out with that iconic article everybody knows about now regarding the $22 million spent on the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which, by the way, is laughable with regards to there being a reported $22 million spent on a 5-year program. I highly doubt that it was the only amount was spent. That's a paltry amount of money to be spent on such an important program. For unidentified aerial phenomena. What I was going to ask you about that
I'm a former defense contractor. Mm-hmm. I sat down and did an article about that. And I actually sat there and said, 5 years, here's what it worked out to, how many scientists, how many engineers, how many support staff, the lights, the security, all that kind of stuff. I worked it out, and we were down to within $50 of what they spent. So
that's amazing. By the way, I actually downloaded the budgets for the years, even a year before the program started. So I looked over 6 years worth of budget data to try and find the hidden program that they had, and I couldn't find it anywhere. The hidden program meaning wondering what they called it. I couldn't find it. The question I have for you is that AATIP, the videos when they came out, and I think there were 3, did any of that, how did that affect you personally? Forget the data. How did you feel about it?
Well, I kind of knew about 2 weeks before it came out. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm a reporter. I had my ear to the ground, so to speak. But we didn't know exactly what the scale of it was going to be. Okay. And we didn't know a bunch of things. So my reaction to it was fantastic. But here's the second half of that. I sat here and watched people for a week on the news cycle on these the morning shows on TV and things like this, sitting there behind their little panels talking, and they were clueless. They were not prepared for the subject matter, and they all looked like a deer in the headlights. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they were making stupid comments. Well, I don't believe there's actually intelligent life out there. Maybe bacterial life, but I don't believe there's real life out there. Oh, somebody else like the Russians or the Chinese must be testing something. And I said, I looked at my friends and I said, look at these people. There's this video. There's pilots talking. Did they listen to the audio? The audio at one point when that UFO makes that really drastic turn, and the pilot said, wow, look at that. And then he says, look at that. There's a whole fleet of them. Nobody hears that. And I wrote it up in my column. I said, why didn't they talk about that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So what I've started doing is I reached out thinking that maybe with that whole December 16th thing, maybe local news directors would be interested in local sightings in their area. And I packaged up a couple of releases for upstate New York, major metropolitan news outlets. Mm-hmm. Like I said, silence and crickets and getting laughed off the phone. Since that time, I said, well, we got a little problem with the journalism community being jaded. So I reached out to about 5 journalism schools within about a 3-hour drive of me here in New York State. And I offered to the professors, would you like an opportunity to have someone come and tell the real story about UFOs and talk about what your students, when they get out into the business, are going to have to deal with in a couple of years when we really do have serious disclosure. And State University of New York at Albany's journalism school had me come up. I was supposed to talk to 2 classes. They loved it so much, they put me up for another night and kept me there for 2 more classes. Okay. And in fact, Albany has decided to take my papers instead of Duke University. So how interesting is that? All my research work, besides all my trans activism stuff back in the 80s and early 90s, but all my UFO research will be immortalized in State University of New York at Albany's archives.
Yeah, that's where Professor Kevin Knuth is out of. He wrote a nice little article app following up the initial Times story, very pro UFO. Did you get a chance to cross paths with him when you were there?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No, I didn't. But the deal, the bottom line with that whole thing is that I've had Albany had me over there in November, and right now I'm in negotiations with Syracuse University. Maybe what's this other school? It starts with a B. I can't remember the school. It's down south of me here. They're loosely talking to me, but some of these professors don't have a lot of slack in their curriculum to have a guest speaker come in, so they're trying to work something out with me. St. Bonaventure, okay, is talking to me, but that's what we're trying to do is get these journalism students exposed to a topic matter that's a little on the challenging side, so they don't get into a newsroom and nobody knows anything about this. A lot of questions I had from major media right after. In fact, if you Google New York Times and UFO in December, you got their current article and you got me because we had an article back in April. So I got a lot of media calls and said, and then first question, did they ask me about the magnitudes? Did they ask me about the hot spots? No. Who's driving them? And I said, I don't know. It might be government aircraft, secret stuff. It might be aliens. It might be interdimensional beings.
Well,
exactly. It could be the Teamsters. I don't know.
Yeah, there is something pretty fascinating about an object going through the sky at unfathomable speeds beyond the kind of physics that we're aware of. That causes people to pause and think. I just wanted to also mention regarding that article that we were talking about, the Washington Post, December 16th, 2017, when Blumenthal, Cooper, and Leslie Kean came out with that AATIP article. It was published on a Saturday. And Frank and I have talked about this numerous times on his talk show about how it was purposely published on a day that people would probably notice this bit of news less. How do you feel about that?
Well, it occupied the news cycle for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So,
the Sunday Times is pretty big. I mean, it might have gone on the website on Saturday, but the Sunday Times, I think that's where it was actually published. And Sunday Times is pretty big. That's a pretty big deal.
That's the deal. They usually put it out on their they echo it on the day before on their online edition, and then usually the next day's paper actually has the print edition version of it. That's typically what the New York Times does. Other papers do different things, but I didn't think that was a big deal. I thought it was a really good action that they put it in the Sunday paper, which actually has a bigger readership than their weekday paper. This is true of all newspapers.
That's a good point. It seemed kind of lackluster regarding the response from the general public. Do you think that's true to the AATIP article?
A lot of people didn't know what to think. Okay, they really didn't know what to think, and like CNN, some of the pundits the first thing they had on was some of these aircraft engineering type people say, oh, people are always trying out something new, and it can't be aliens, and it was still this negative. It can't be this, it can't be that, but over the next few weeks, you did notice we had more pilots coming out of the woodwork starting to say, yeah, there is this stuff out there and we don't know what it is, A couple of months later, last February, I got to interview Lou Alessandro. Okay. And the tricky thing there with him was I had seen an interview done at the IUFO, at the International UFO Congress, and they asked all the questions I was going to ask, and he was about every third question. Well, I can't tell you because of my security oath. Okay. So Linda and I went back again. This is Linda's skill. She's the librarian, and they're trained to ask questions a certain way. And she came back and wrote up a list of about 30 questions, completely different than anything these other people had asked, all the go right for the jugular vein kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And this was one of those little sneaky girl things, you can, if you ask a question a different way, you can get an answer, a certain way. And pillow talk, mm-hmm. And we had a 2-hour interview, and he didn't give me the security oath thing once. I got one curt answer on one thing. Did you guys have a military database, and does it interface? And he said, yes. I said, does it interface with like NUFORC or MUFON? He said, Posse Comitatus laws, we weren't allowed to access the civilian databases, but we have our own database based on sightings that have been reported within the military services, all branches. So that was how we got our question, and that was the extent of it. And my editor and I chose not to publish the results of that interview because we're letting everybody else make fools of themselves because they're asking all the wrong questions.
I had a question to you about radar data. Unidentified craft traversing the skies at speeds that are beyond what our aircraft are known to be able to accomplish. Do you ever compile radar data concerning that kind of data, I guess?
Where would I get it?
Well, I was just curious. I thought maybe you might have some kind of ability to. You don't have the ability to reach out to anybody for that. Huh?
No. The FAA has told people not to get. The local MUFON investigators are getting that stuff.
Okay.
Do you know there's not even a cattle or livestock mutilation database?
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you about that in just a moment.
I went looking for that recently, and it doesn't exist, and
okay.
And for all the people who are interested in that topic, you would have thought somebody would sat down and started collecting this data into a database. There's a crop circle database out there, but there is not one for livestock mutilation, which is strange.
Yeah, to my knowledge.
And, you're right. I just want to jump in here. You're right about the radar data. Mm-hmm. The only collection of data that I'm aware of that focuses exclusively on the radar data was something compiled by Professor Peter Sturrock a number of years ago. He went back through some older Blue Book files and picked up some international cases as well. So he was able to compile a couple hundred over a number of years, spread out over a number of years. And he's got that. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any. I think that would be a very interesting subset to put together. But as far as I know, that's the only one.
All right. I want to throw water on all this conversation. Yeah. Okay? All right. You're talking to a former electronic warfare specialist.
I was just going to say.
And I'm a specialist in radar. Okay? Mm-hmm. I know how they make them. I know how they work. And I know all the different kind of configurations they do with them. All right. There's a little thing called stealth technology where you can take a huge thing like a C-5 transport or a B-52 bomber, something like that, something that big, and on radar make it appear to be about the size of the birds and the bees. Okay? This is called stealth technology. And if we've got the ability to cloak this stuff, they've got the ability to cloak this stuff. And if we do see them on radar, we're being allowed to see them on radar.
So if something that is unidentified, that is going very fast, much faster than the military aircraft we have out in the skies, and it's spotted on radar, does that mean that is evidence of having caught something going very fast? Is there such thing as radar evidence of that, in your opinion?
There probably is if they track them. I mean, let's go back on radar evidence. 1986, Japan Airlines freighter flight coming at 747 flying here from Japan. Okay, that's the pilot that ran into a mile-wide Saturn-shaped UFO north of Alaska, and he kept trying to get around it, and it had the agility to keep up with him. Okay, and they tracked all that on radar. And of course, the CIA went and confiscated the tapes, but one of the FAA guys made a copy of the tapes long before the CIA guys got there, and they got everything except his tape. That's the only reason we've got proof that happened. But
he kept a copy. I know that would John Callahan, and two of the guys who picked it up was Bruce Maccabee was one of the fellows who picked it up, and he went along with Ron Pandolfi, whose name has come up here a few times.
Yeah. So, this stuff, if they care to show themselves, you can track it, and if it's reflective. But if they've got some kind of shielding technology that we don't know about, or they're using some kind of anti-reflective technology, we're not going to track them.
But my question's a little bit more specific than that. Do you feel that is evidence of an unidentified flying object?
Anytime you could track something on radar that's flying beyond the known of it's unidentified, it doesn't mean it's not something they're testing out in Area 51 or something, but it is evidence, but you just don't know what it is. It's a good UFO. You just don't know if it's
that's my point.
One of something of ours or something of those guys,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And real quick, I want to jump in here just to share a point about that Nimitz case that came out during the New York Times story. Now, we had Kevin Day, who was the radar operator on the Princeton. He saw UFOs on his radar scope, but the pilots including David Fravor, who actually went out and intercepted these UFOs, their radar was jammed. So it's just a little interesting aside.
Okay, and also just wanted to mention the National Centers for Environmental Information, which has their own website. I'll go ahead and give everybody the URL of it. It's the ncdc.noaa.gov. They have radar data that they compile, and you can actually go on there and look up radar data information.
The thing is, I have people ask me if I've got all this, I've added in, all this information. The average UFO sighting is barely in those databases is barely a sentence or two. We saw I was walking the dog and I saw thus and such, and wow, sometimes you get a long narrative. Most of the time, it's barely a sentence telling you what they saw and when. Okay. And I have people call me all the time and say, well, did they tell you what kind of an angle it was on the horizon? I said, no, they don't. That stuff is not there. We don't know the demographics. We don't know the ages of the people, the genders of the people who saw it. It is what, when, and where is all I've got.
It's just raw data, basically.
Wouldn't it be safe to say, though, or correct to say that the AATIP videos were all based on radar data?
Oh, yes, they were. And that was one of those unusually good situations. Of course, the military's got really fantastic radar these days, particularly the aircraft carriers, which is what we were dealing with. And there's a lot of stuff that they can't tell us because of the one thing Lou Alessandro told me. Mm-hmm. I've had people say, well, Cheryl, they loiter around all of our bases around the country. No, they don't. I ran a list of like 80 bases. And oh, by the way, I've run all 55 of the commercial nuclear reactors in the United States. Okay, they don't hang out there. Trust me. Where they do hang out is where the fleet is and where our most advanced technology is. That's what they're interested in. So the Navy sees a lot, and to some degree, the Air Force sees a lot.
Now, do you go off land? I know that there is a website out there called Water UFO, where the gentleman who runs that, whose name escapes me, unfortunately, I'd like to give him a plug, but I do remember the website where he's compiled a lot of UFO sightings on water. Do you take a look at that as well, or just the land-based stuff?
I've never looked at it. I'm just
Okay.
looking at what MUFON and Newfork have. They're the principles. There's a whole bunch of what I'm going to call ma and pa sites gathering UFO information. And in a way, I think it's a bad thing, because what's happening is people are reporting these things on Facebook to their friends, but they're not filing a report with something like MUFON or Newfork. And so we're losing that data. It's just as bad as people not reporting them, because we're not plugged into all these little mom and pop databases. I've even reached out to a couple of them, and they wouldn't support me. They wouldn't help me. They weren't willing to share the data with me. So I think it hurts the situation. In fact, National UFO Reporting Center, in my 2001 to 2015 material, was always about 60 to 70% of the data. Okay. In 2018, they were only 45% of the data. They've had a steep decline in reports on their service, and MUFON is 54% of the sightings.
Okay. Real quick question about getting the data in there. One thing that you can do when you have a database together is you can query it. You talked a little bit about querying regarding the latitudes of different sightings, and you talked about looking for possible correlations between military or nuclear sites and the sightings. What kind of queries have you run that really came back and you said, wow, you weren't expecting this? Give us some of your biggest surprises in looking at this data a little bit more closely and analyzing it.
Okay, one of the first big surprises we had, and Linda found this, latitude. There's a difference in monthly sightings based on the latitude. If you're in a northern state, it's got a quiescent amount of sightings from January to up to about maybe April, May, and then it starts going up in July and August are through the roof, and then after about October, November, December, it trails right back down to that quiescent amount. That quiescent amount of sightings are the dog walkers who are out there, dog walkers and smokers who are out there day in and day out. When you move down to the mid-Atlantic states and go all the way across the country, you see that middle peak in July and August start going back down. It starts flattening out. And by the time you get to the southern states, it's a statistically flat thing, sort of like a picket fence. So yeah, it is latitude dependent and driven to some degree on it's warmer weather drives it. But I'll give you an example. You go to Alaska, and all the sightings are January, February, March, April, and then they start trailing off in May. June, July, August is like nothing, and then it starts going back up again. It's white nights up there during that summer months. And I've talked to two MUFON investigators from Alaska, and we agree on that. That was a surprise. We didn't know there was a latitude difference, and we didn't know this seemed to be driven by population, temperate weather, and time of day. Okay, time of day. 65 to 75% of the sightings happen between 5 o'clock at night and 10:30. Okay, and then the rest of it is just little dinky trickle of sightings throughout the rest of the day. There's a little dip between 6 o'clock in the morning and about 9 o'clock in the morning. It's morning drive time. It's almost non-existent. That surprised the heck out of us.
Yeah, daytime sightings are pretty interesting. There aren't as many of them as there are, obviously, the nighttime sightings. That's not really surprising. But have you taken a closer look at any kind of patterns in the daytime data? When things are a little bit lower, but there's still some numbers there. You still might be able to get some interesting information from that batch of sightings.
We did. There was nothing remarkable there.
Okay.
Now, we did make one discovery. I'm hesitant to say it because we only did it for 4 states. Okay. Another scientist did this with my data. Okay. He added latitude and longitude information, and we did it for 4 states. And I know how time consuming this is because, like I said, I just got done doing it for over 6,600 records. I just got done doing it, and it took me 2 weeks. He did a similar thing, and his wife told him if he did one more state, he'd be divorced. Okay, so What we did, we wanted to see. Do you know what sidereal time is?
I do. Yes. You want to explain that to the folks? You could probably do it better than I
Okay.
can, but I know what it is. Yeah.
Okay, we all think we have a 24-hour day. Actually, sidereal time is a 23-hour, 56-minute day. But everybody said, well, that's 24 hours. No, it's 23 hours, 56 minutes. And that means the star that was overhead, not right this minute now, will be overhead tomorrow 4 minutes earlier, and the day after that 4 minutes earlier than that. Okay, it's a moving target. So I asked the astronomer professor, I said, I wonder if there's a particular star time that the UFO sightings are.
That's such a great question.
Okay, so he thought it was too. So he went and worked on the whole thing, and it scared the snot out of both of us. The answer, yeah, there is.
Well, we want to know what it is, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to jump in really quick about sidereal time, there was also some research related to remote viewing. This is getting a little bit off topic, but I think the sidereal time is an interesting subject. That the remote viewing results were better at, I believe it was 1,350 hours, roughly 130. 1330. Okay.
And 1330 basically. It's a 2-hour window either side of 1330. It's on okay. That's what it works out to.
What
Okay.
was the? Yeah, go ahead. I was just waiting.
Now when I say 1330, I'm talking about 1:30 astronomical, 1:30 in the afternoon astronomical time is what I'm talking about. Now that could be in the morning one part of the year. It can be in the evening or mid morning a different time of the year. Okay, it's a constantly moving target. So the idea, okay, and we're going to call that the anomalous cognition window. Okay. Well, we thought maybe people are seeing them during the anomalous cognition window. Nope, not even close. Where they're seeing them was at 1830, and that's when the galaxy is directly overhead.
Oh my gosh.
And
it was consistent with 6 states.
That is very interesting.
Which 6 states?
We did 2 small ones. We did Iowa and Wyoming because they're like number 24, number 50 and 58 type of thing. They're really down there to nothing. And he did California, and it was one other state that he did. But the bottom line is the peak of it was always at around the 1830, 1800 window.
That is fat. And do you have any ideas on why that might be, or are you just kind of just still taking in the information?
Well, I've told that to a number of people, and the common suggestion is maybe the portal that they wink out of when they're doing their like subspace travel or something, whatever, in 1830 means the galaxy is overhead your location. Okay. So maybe they see more of these things because they're popping out of that thing. Out of that portal or something. We don't know. We don't know what the deal is.
We can call it a portal just to have some kind of terminology to refer to it.
Yeah. It's okay to speculate. I'm all in with speculation so long as you got something to back it up and you're clear
I present that at a UFO conference and most people just sniff. So
I think it's fantastic. I love listening.
I'm very disappointed about the amount of people. I was reading some stuff today, and the people are saying, "Oh, all her stuff is just numbers."
No, that's not true at all. And I was also going to ask you, Cheryl. You've done so much for the UFO and other phenomena communities. What other endeavors do you have on your plate? What do you have for the future?
There's a television program in the works. In fact, I was talking to my producer 2 days ago, and it's an LA-based producer, and we've got several networks bidding on the program, and Linda and I are the primary consultants for it, and they're basing it on our book. And I can't get into it deeper than that, but right now. But in a month I might be able to tell you a whole bunch. But right now I can't tell you more than that. But I do know one thing. There were 6 or 7 networks that were bidding for it. at the last call, and there was an eighth network that no matter who bought it, they wanted to buy the international rights. Okay. And it's kind of fallout from Project Blue Book. All the networks are scrambling to have some kind of content to satisfy the audience that is going to be very interested both in like Ancient Aliens and Project Blue Book.
Yeah. Have you been watching Project Blue Book, the drama series by the History Channel? I just wanted to let you know right away. I have not been giving very good reviews of the shows. For Frank knows this. For the reason being that the shows, yes, they are drama based, but it would be nice if they used a little bit of data from the actual Blue Book cases themselves.
They do, sort of at the end of the program.
Yeah, I understand.
But I like too many people in the UFO community are asking to drink from the fire hose. They did a dramatic series based on the facts. We have to slowly educate the rest of our friends and neighbors.
And I have to take, I actually don't agree with you on that. I'll tell you why. People I've talked to from that I have spoken to at length have told me, and these are men, women, kids, people from all different backgrounds, all walks of life, have told me they're more than ready. They feel like they're being treated like babies, that they're beyond this kind of stuff, meaning the slow drip of information. They want to know more, and they want to know it now. We're getting a lot of mixed reviews regarding Project Blue Book from friends and people we don't know who are saying, yeah, it's a neat show that's sort of a takeoff from the X-Files, but it'd be nice to become more educated in the show itself about Project Blue Book cases. That is the main complaint we're hearing.
Okay, I disagree with you 100%, but I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Yeah, we want somebody to be contrarian.
When my book was in process, when we were working on it, the baristas where I got my coffee. At the time, I was working at a bank up in their billing department, and boy, I learned how to work with data at Lockheed Martin. I learned how to really manipulate the data working for a bank. Okay. And I'd be down on Monday morning. The baristas knew I was working on the project. Said, "Hey, what state did you work on this weekend?" "Oh, I worked on this state." Well, when it came to New York State, one day the guy said, "Well, what'd you find out in New York State?" I said, 5,141 in the 15 years. Wow. And I felt somebody tap on my back, and I turned around, this little lady sitting there, and said, "Did I understand you correctly? Did you say New York State's had like over 5,000 UFO sightings?" And I said, "Yes, we have in the last 15 years." We watched the color drain from her face, and we had to help her to a chair. Okay. I have had other people either almost faint. I have had fully grown men just absolutely lose it on this stuff. The copy of the book that we left at the coffee shop, it's dog-eared to death. Okay, from what I understand. In fact, I'm about ready to give them a new one because their copy's about destroyed right now. But there are people who look at this thing and says, "This can't be legit. This can't be real. My God, that upends my entire life. I mean, this can't be real." Those are the people that need to be educated a little bit more gradually. So that's
Cheryl, sorry about that. Yeah, I've got a quick question from the chat. Kind of interesting. I don't know how much this comes up, but someone, William, wants to know if these cases that you get, is there a separate field, I guess you would say, for folks who have sightings, and they also made calls to local law enforcement, a kind of like a 911 call. Is that included at all in the databases? That they took that extra step to report it to some kind of local authority?
I think they did, maybe. You know the part that has the text about the actual sighting?
Okay.
That's the first thing I erase. I'm not looking at cases. I'm looking at what, when, and where. I'm looking at magnitudes.
Understood. Okay.
Oh, okay. I have a question.
I
You
get a lot of
mentioned,
I got a lot of people yelling at me about that. I had somebody challenging me, some I'm going to call them trolls.
Mhm.
Oh, we want your best 25 cases. Ha ha, you know.
Right.
And I said, and me and me and Alejandro Reyes from IUFOC sat there and tried to tell him, Cheryl doesn't study cases. Cheryl doesn't vet cases. She's looking at higher data. Oh, they don't get it. Okay,
Do
so
you,
that's it.
do you have anything else that jumped out at you besides the correlation with sidereal time? Anything else off the top of your head on that?
I've got a lot of information. All of the shapes have been declining over the last 6 years drastically, except three, and they are on the drastic increase.
What are the three shapes?
Saturn shaped, teardrop shaped, and egg shaped. And my correlation is this: whenever the Saturn shapes show up, so do egg and teardrop. So my argument is that the Saturn shape is the mother bay ship. The teardrops are like a shuttle that can carry a number of individuals, and the egg shapes is your little two-seater scout ship.
Okay. And the ones that are
Vector.
dropping are the triangle shapes. What else? What am I missing here?
Everything.
Everything.
Pick anything else. They've fallen off like a stone.
Cigar shaped. Okay. That's
Everything.
interesting.
Everything.
okay, so there's all, I'm sorry, there's all kinds of shapes. I'm just going to mention them. There's blimp, cone, cylinder, egg, Saturn-like, teardrop, boomerang, chevron, diamond, fireball,
Spheres, circles,
triangle,
squares.
missile, circle, disc, flash, square, rectangular, cigar, cross, dumbbell, oval, star-like. And Cheryl, of course, knows all of these because she deals with this on a regular. Cheryl,
But can I interject a thought, though? Hold that thought for a moment.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, Linda's argument here is the truth is in the shapes. We did a study here a couple of months ago where we took the whole list of them and then we took out everything that could be in anywhere near conventional, associated with a conventional aircraft, cigar shapes, things like that. Okay, could be an airplane from the side, that kind of thing. Even took out triangles and boomerangs because they could be confused with B-2 bombers and stuff like that. TR-3B, everybody tells me. Okay, I've seen one of these triangle things, 2 stories deep, 2 football fields long, moving along at a leisurely 50 miles an hour, silently at that. But it was years ago. So the argument is we took only the most exotic shapes, the circles, the squares, the egg shapes, things like that. And we looked at those very carefully. And the funny thing about them is if you look at them in the scale of the numbers, imagine you're walking through some tall grass that maybe goes up to your waist, okay? And the analogy is you're walking through the tall grass. That's all the other sightings combined, okay? But in those exotic sightings that are almost non-existent, some of them, they went along with only 1 or 2 or 3 sightings a year for years. And then about 8 years ago, they started ticking upward. Okay. And we had one that went along at less than 5 sightings a year. And then about 5 years ago, it went up to 10, it went up to 30, it went up to 50, and now it's in the hundreds. Okay. I showed that to Lou Alessandro and I said, is this a new player in town? And he just looked at it with a very troubled look.
That's intriguing. I had kind of a question about one of your graphs regarding New York State UFO sightings by Saturday hours. It's just a small question, but it's the graph you gave us based on 4,658 time measurable UFO sighting reports between 2001 and 2017.
Yep.
It also indicates 77% of UFO sightings occur within, and this is where my question is. It says occur within 5 p.m. to 1100 hours. So is it 5 p.m. to 11 p.m.?
11 p.m. Yeah. It should have been. It probably should have said 2300, but okay.
Okay, I just wanted to clear up that detail right there because that's kind of important to know that it would be 11 p.m. on that graph.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I did have a question from a listener. He wants to know, Cheryl, since the Tic Tac encounter, there is a huge push for servicemen and women to open up about their sightings. Does this interest you in being the leader to track this info?
No.
Okay.
Did
And
you,
they,
real quick, did you have
yeah.
any sightings while you were in the service, either branch?
Yeah, I had sightings.
Okay. Okay.
Nothing I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
I can tell you about one.
Okay.
Christmas Eve, 1971. I was in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. I was walking at about 11:30 at night. I'm walking to the base chapel to go to midnight mass with a friend of mine for something to do. And we're looking out, and I'm looking at the sky. I'm looking out at Constellation Taurus. We saw this thing streaking across the sky. We said, jet. And then it stopped. And we sat there and looked at it and said, jets don't stop on a dime. And then it started dancing around like a fairy. I said, okay, Tom, watch this thing. It's going to take off like lickety split. And about 2 moments later, gone. Okay. Neither one of us had our minds on midnight mass when we got to the chapel.
I bet not. I bet not.
I didn't tell anybody that story till about 15 years ago. I was as much a victim to the don't tell anybody what you see type thing as anybody else.
Now, you're going to be next month out in Laughlin, Nevada, like a lot of people that we've had on recently and have coming up in the future. Tell us, are you getting excited for that? You're good to go? You ready to go? You have everything together?
I've got the general presentation done because they've asked me to do data mixed in with a conversation about why we get so much pushback from the media. As a journalist, I can talk to that. So I'm using similar slides that I used at the university with these journalism schools. I'm going to thin it down a bunch, and I'm putting a little bit more of my charts and graphs in. And then since I got 2018 data now right here at my fingertips, I'm going to go ahead and put it I'm not even going to try and merge the 2018 with the master database yet because it's not ready. So I'm just going to do my by the way, here's the latest and greatest hot off the spreadsheet and just do a separate presentation about 2018.
Okay.
But the numbers overall have been dropping over the last 5 years, and this is the lowest number since 2010.
Any ideas on why that might be?
If all the mansplainers on the internet are correct, they've left us because we're going to have a space force. They're sick of us. They ran out of grant money and are going back to their home planet. I've heard probably 100 different answers. Okay. I have no idea. I'm beginning to think it is a natural part of a natural cycle. That or somebody is preventing National UFO Reporting Center from getting sighting information.
Okay.
I got one last thought on that.
Please go ahead.
All these years, some nefarious agency has been padding the UFO directories to distract people, that are researchers and investigators, to distract them. And maybe since the last couple of years, they've done this. Okay. I'm sorry. I have an emergency call.
Okay. You got to wrap up then?
Yes.
Okay. I understood. Not a problem. Cheryl, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Cheryl.
By all means, feel free to drop out and Chant and I will wrap up here. This was great. I appreciate it. No doubt about it.
Frank, that was fantastic show.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed having had the opportunity. I was actually going to ask her another question. I'll tell you what it was.
Okay.
That there's a list of UFO organizations around the world. A few of them are Belarus, Estonia, France, Norway, Sweden, Russia, Turkey, the UK, and actually a lot more. And if she actually compiles any data related to those countries. But anyway, yes, that was such an extremely informative interview. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
The time flew. Cheryl's a great interview. I had a fantastic time. And I'm Really, I was kind of dumbfounded by that sidereal time correlation there. I thought that was really interesting. So it was great having her on.
I'm here.
Oh, you're back. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Great. So then, can I go ahead and ask you my question?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. The question I have for you is there's a list of UFO organizations around the world. I'll just go ahead and repeat it. And a few of them are in Belarus, Estonia, France, Norway, Sweden, Russia, Turkey, the UK. UFO organizations that are all around the world in different countries. Do you ever compile data from them?
I've tried. I'm having a little trouble interfacing with them. So we're thinking about doing that, especially if the television show goes. We're going to get an intern in here. We're going to start trying to reach out to some of them. We did try to. I don't want to go any further than that. I know the data from Newfork and MUFON that's international related is vastly incomplete. So that's all I can say.
Okay, and then I just want to mention an interesting website that I know you're more than aware of, and that is ufostalker.com. That's ufostalker.com.
That's a good website. I like that website.
A lot of people, like Frank and myself and others like to use it. We're not quite at your level, Cheryl, at expert level regarding compiling data, but it's sort of the go-to website we like to go to in order to get a little bit of information. Do you ever use that website, Cheryl?
I haven't touched it in 4 years. I used to look at it all the time. I'll tell you what, when I was reporting sightings more heavily in my column, I used to look at it a great deal. So I was probably good on it right up until we did the book. And these days I write pretty much disclosure. I write pretty much stats. I write what's going on different places, and that's about it. I'm not really into reporting sightings anymore.
Okay, and by the way, you did mention disclosure. Do you mind talking just a little bit about that?
Well,
what you mean by that?
Well, disclosure would be nice to have our congressional rep. There's a movement right now in Congress to talk about the ATIP program. Okay,
yes, yeah.
And it's starting to get a lot of traction. And I hope to God they do get public hearings about it. I really do. It's long overdue. My two senators ignored my stuff. They told me if they did tell me, they told me they lost my book,
That would be Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, I believe.
Yep. Gillibrand's people won't talk to me. At least the Schumer's people work with me. They said, well, the book the book might have gotten lost in the mail at the Congressional Mail Office. I said, so you're telling me I can't write a reliable path of mail to my congressional representative? And he started backpedaling. And I said, he said, well, can you send me another it was my 4-page letter. He said, can you send me another copy of the letter? And I said, yeah, my original one was stapled to a 2.5-pound book. Tell me how that got lost. So since that time, they had me come. I literally had to walk a copy over to their office here in Syracuse, but I'm not too impressed. They don't take my phone calls either. So until this stuff, somebody said to me, maybe if this whole congressional investigation thing gets going on, maybe they'll reach out to me since I've got the only book of statistics, and they know the Congressional Information Office has a copy of my book because they bought one.
Got it. Well, anything else there, Chant?
Folks, I do have to go.
Yes,
understood.
We appreciate your time, Cheryl.
Absolutely. Had a blast. I really did. I appreciate it, Cheryl. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
All right. So let's wrap this up. I think it was I had a great time. I did.
I had a fantastic time, Frank. Thank you very much for
no problem.
Such
Thanks
a wonderful
to Cheryl
show
as well. So let's wrap this up. We'll be back next week with Peter Robbins. It's going to be a lot of fun talking to Peter. He's always got a lot of stuff, and it'll be a jam-packed show, I'm sure of that. Chant and everybody else, have a great weekend.
Yes, have a great weekend, Frank, and thank you very much. I look forward to interviewing Peter Robbins as well.
Sure thing. Okay, so everybody, thanks for joining in, and we will catch you next Wednesday with Peter Robbins. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.